Everything you think you know about knowledge might be built on unstable ground. In the early 20th century, a crisis shook European philosophy. Mathematics seemed certain, physics made predictions, but philosophy couldn't agree on anything fundamental. Edmund Husserl saw this catastrophe and decided to do something unprecedented. He would create a new science, one so rigorous it could ground all other knowledge. What Husserl proposed sounds deceptively simple. Instead of studying the world directly, study how the world appears to consciousness. This shift changes everything. Traditional science examines objects out there, measuring and categorizing them. Phenomenology examines the very act of experiencing those objects. When you see a tree, science studies the tree itself. Phenomenology studies the seeing, the appearing, the conscious event where tree and mind meet. This isn't psychology. Psychology treats consciousness as one more object in the world, subject to causal laws and brain mechanisms. Phenomenology refuses this reduction. Consciousness isn't a thing among things, but the very condition for anything to appear at all. Without conscious experience, the notion of a world makes no sense. Husserl wanted a rigorous science, yet he insisted on studying what seemed most elusive, pure experience itself. The implications exploded across disciplines. If we could describe the universal structures of how things appear, we'd have a foundation beneath all empirical sciences. Psychology would understand what experience is before measuring it. Philosophy would escape endless debates by returning to the phenomena themselves. Human sciences would grasp how meaning gets constituted before studying particular meanings. This wasn't just another philosophical school. This was an attempt to recreate knowledge from the ground up. Yet something remained hidden in this ambitious project. Husserl claimed to study pure phenomena, but he needed a method to access them. Living our daily lives, we never question whether the world exists. We simply assume it and move forward. However, this assumption might be precisely what blocks us from genuine phenomenological insight. To see consciousness clearly, we'd need to suspend something so deeply ingrained we barely notice it operates at all. Your mind has never been empty. Not once in your entire life has consciousness existed without being directed towards something. This discovery stands at the absolute core of phenomenology, yet most people live their whole lives without recognizing it. All consciousness is consciousness of something. Every mental act points beyond itself. When you think about an idea. When you perceive an object. When you imagine a scenario. When you remember an event. There's no such thing as pure thinking disconnected from what's thought, pure perceiving disconnected from what's perceived. This directedness, this essential aboutness, Husserl called intentionality. The term comes from medieval philosophy, but he transformed it into the defining feature of mental life. This changes how we understand the mind entirely. Consciousness isn't a container with contents inside it. It isn't a theater where representations parade before an inner spectator. Consciousness is fundamentally relational, always already reaching toward its objects. The act of perceiving and the object perceived form an inseparable structure. You cannot have one without the other. Consider this carefully. The mystery deepens here. We can be conscious of things that don't exist. You can imagine a golden mountain, remember a dream, anticipate a future event that never occurs. Consciousness intends objects that have no physical reality whatsoever. This means intentionality doesn't depend on whether its object is real. What matters is the correlation, the structural bond between mental act and intended object. Real or imaginary, present or absent, every object appears only through intentional acts of consciousness. Traditional philosophy split reality into mental and physical, subjective and objective, inside and outside. Intentionality dissolves these divisions. Consciousness always transcends itself toward the world. The world always appears through consciousness. Neither exists independently. Furthermore, this inseparable correlation hides something even more fundamental, something we enact every moment without noticing. We assume the world simply exists, solid and independent. Yet this assumption itself requires investigation. What happens when we stop taking existence for granted? Why do you believe the world exists? Stop and consider the question seriously, not philosophically, but practically. When you wake up tomorrow, will you doubt that your room is there? When you walk to the kitchen, will you question whether the floor supports your weight? Of course not. You live in what Husserl called the natural attitude. The natural attitude is the baseline mode of human existence. We experience objects as simply there, existing independently, continuing whether we perceive them or not. This isn't a theory we consciously adopt. Nobody decides to believe in external reality. The natural attitude operates as a pre-reflective certainty, a living conviction that runs deeper than explicit thought. When you reach for a cup, you don't first conclude it exists, you just grab it. This attitude carries implicit commitments. We assume space extends beyond our visual field. We assume time flowed before our birth and continues after our attention shifts. We assume other people have minds, that objects have hidden sides, that the laws of nature hold universally. These aren't justified beliefs, but working presuppositions that make daily life possible. Philosophy calls them presuppositions, but really, they're the unquestioned ground upon which all our activities rest. Husserl insisted this isn't a mistake. The natural attitude isn't false, merely naive. This technical term means something specific here. Someone is naive who doesn't examine their own presuppositions, who hasn't made their operating assumptions explicit. Scientists are naive when they study nature without asking how nature appears to scientific consciousness. We're all naive when we live without questioning the very possibility of a world being given to experience. Most people remain in the natural attitude their entire lives, and that's perfectly fine for practical purposes. Nevertheless, phenomenology requires something different. If we want to understand how consciousness works, how objects get constituted in awareness, how meaning emerges from experience, we cannot simply assume the world's existence. We must find a way to suspend this most basic of all beliefs. The question becomes urgent. Can we step outside the natural attitude without falling into skepticism or madness? Husserl discovered a radical method that does exactly this, and it transforms everything. Imagine suspending your belief in everything, not doubting it, not denying it, simply putting it in parentheses. This is the Epoché, and it represents one of the most radical moves in philosophical history. Husserl needed a method to escape the natural attitude without collapsing into skepticism. What he discovered was neither belief nor disbelief, but something stranger: suspension. The Greek word epoché means holding back, abstaining from judgment. When we perform the epoché, we don't claim the world is an illusion. We don't argue that external reality might not exist. Instead, we refrain from making any commitment about existence whatsoever. The world continues appearing exactly as before, but we stop affirming or denying its independent reality. We bracket it. This differs fundamentally from Cartesian doubt. Descartes doubted everything to find something indubitable. He treated doubt as a tool to reach certainty. Husserl's suspension isn't doubt at all. The Epoché doesn't question whether things exist, but simply doesn't participate in the existential claim. When you see a tree, you continue seeing the tree exactly as you did before. However, you no longer posit it as a thing existing independently of your consciousness. You observe the phenomenon itself, the appearing, without making metaphysical commitments. What remains after this suspension? Pure phenomena, consciousness and its intentional objects, stripped of all existential assumptions. We're left with appearances in the precise sense, not false appearances versus true reality, but the sheer givenness of experience itself. The tree as perceived, the memory as remembered, the concept as thought. This is the phenomenological reduction, the leading back of all experience to its appearance in consciousness. Most people find this move incomprehensible at first. We're so immersed in the natural attitude that suspending it feels impossible or meaningless. Yet Husserl insisted phenomenology becomes possible only through this reduction. By bracketing existence, we gain access to the structures of consciousness itself, the ways objects get constituted in awareness, the essential features of experience. The reduction opens a new domain for investigation, one that was always there, but remained invisible while we simply lived through it. Still, a puzzle emerges immediately. If consciousness is always intentional, always directed toward objects, what exactly are we conscious of after the reduction? The tree we see isn't the physical tree anymore, since we've bracketed its existence. So what is it? This question leads to one of Husserl's most important distinctions, one that structures all phenomenological analysis. Every act of consciousness has a double structure. When you perceive this screen, there's the perceiving and there's the perceived. When you remember yesterday, there's the remembering and there's what's remembered. When you imagine a vacation, there's the imagining and the imagined. Husserl called these two poles Noesis and Noema, and understanding their relationship unlocks phenomenological method. Noesis is the act itself, perceiving, imagining, remembering, judging, desiring, willing. These are different ways consciousness intends its objects, different modes of directedness. Each noetic act has its own character and structure. Perceiving gives its object as present. Remembering gives its object as past. Imagining gives its object as unreal. These aren't just psychological differences, but essential variations in how consciousness relates to what it intends. Noema is the object precisely as it appears in that act, not the real object, since we've bracketed existence, not a mental representation inside consciousness. Since consciousness has no inside, the noema is the intentional object itself, the ment as such. When you perceive a cube, the noema includes the front face you see, the back face you expect, the solidity you anticipate, the spatial orientation relative to your body. All of this constitutes how the cube appears. Here's where things get profound. The same physical object can have infinitely many noemata. You see the cube from the front, then from the side, then from above. Each perception has a different noema, yet you experience them as perspectives on one identical object. The cube as seen from here, the cube as seen from there, the cube as touched, the cube as imagined. Different noemata, same object. How does consciousness achieve this unity across variation? Furthermore, different noetic acts can intend the same noema. You can perceive the cube, then remember perceiving it, then imagine it in a different location, then judge that it's heavy. 4 different acts, 4 different modes of givenness, yet somehow the cube remains identifiable as the same intentional object across these variations. The noetic noematic structure reveals how consciousness builds stable objects from flowing experiences. This analysis might seem abstract, but it explains something astonishing about mental life. Consciousness doesn't passively receive objects like a mirror reflects images. Something more complex occurs, something involving active synthesis and constitution. The object you experience isn't just given whole and complete. Your consciousness participates in constructing it, giving it sense and structure through layers of intentional acts. This construction isn't arbitrary invention. Rather, it follows essential laws that make experience possible at all. The world doesn't simply hit consciousness from outside. A deeper process unfolds, one so automatic we never notice it happening. Husserl called this process constitution, and he spent decades trying to understand how it works. What does it mean to say consciousness constitutes its objects? Constitution isn't creation from nothing. We don't imagine the world into existence through mental magic. The term means something more subtle, giving sense, bestowing meaning, organizing experience according to structures that make objects appear as objects. When you see a coffee cup, you don't just receive sensory data. Your consciousness actively synthesizes those sensations into a unified thing with identity, properties, and practical significance. Consider how you experience any ordinary object. A book lies on the table. You see its front cover, but not its back. You see its rectangular shape, but not its precise thickness. You see it from a particular angle, under specific lighting, at a definite distance. Yet you experience it as a complete object that continues around the edges, that has a backside, that would look different from other perspectives, that exists whether you look at it or not. All these aspects belong to your experience despite not being given in this moment. This is constitution in action. Consciousness fills in what isn't presented, anticipates what would appear if you moved, retains what just appeared a moment ago, synthesizes fragmentary sensations into a coherent object with an identity. You don't perform these operations deliberately. They happen pre-reflectively, automatically, according to essential structures of experience itself. Without this constitutive activity, you'd have disconnected sensations, not a world. Temporal synthesis makes this possible. Objects get constituted through time. When you watch someone walk across a room, each moment gives you a slightly different appearance, yet you experience one continuous movement. The past phases don't disappear but remain retained in consciousness. The future phases are anticipated based on the present. Your awareness holds together what time separates, creating unity from succession. Husserl left over 40,000 pages of unpublished manuscripts trying to solve the problem of constitution. He never finished. The deeper he investigated, the more complex it became. How does consciousness constitute not just objects, but space itself, time itself, other subjects, ideal objects like numbers, values like beauty? Each type of object requires its own constitutive analysis. Some he completed, others remained fragmentary. Yet his fundamental insight stands. The world we experience is neither purely subjective nor purely objective, but constituted through consciousness according to essential structures that demand investigation. These structures aren't arbitrary, they have necessity. Phenomenology seeks to discover them through a special method that varies possibilities to find what must remain invariant. Think about the last time you saw a triangle, maybe on a sign, maybe in a geometry book, maybe doodled on paper. Now imagine a different triangle, bigger or smaller, rotated, with different angles. Keep changing it in your mind. Make one side longer, flip it upside down, stretch it into barely recognizable proportions. At what point does it stop being a triangle? When you reach that limit, you've discovered something essential. This mental exercise demonstrates eidetic variation, and Husserl built an entire method around it. The word eidos comes from Greek, but in phenomenology it simply means essence, the whatness of a thing, the invariant structure that makes something what it is. Essences aren't mystical entities floating in Platonic heaven. They're discoverable features of experience itself, accessible through systematic imagination. The method works like this. Take any experience, any object of consciousness, begin varying it imaginatively. Change its color, size, position, context. Keep altering features one by one. Most changes don't destroy the object's identity. A red triangle can become blue and remain a triangle. However, certain changes break the structure entirely. Remove the third side, and you no longer have a triangle. This breaking point reveals necessity, the eidetic core that cannot vary without destroying the kind of thing you're investigating. Phenomenology applies this everywhere. What's essential to perceiving versus imagining? What must remain invariant for something to count as a memory? What structures define emotional experience as such? By varying possibilities, we discover the necessary forms that organize consciousness. These aren't empirical generalizations from observed cases, but insights into essential structures. Yet this raises a question Husserl grappled with throughout his career. If we discover essences through imagination, how do we know they're universal and necessary, rather than just features of our particular rata? Psychology? Different people might vary things differently. What guarantees that eidetic intuition captures genuine necessity? The answer requires understanding how consciousness itself has essential structures, structures that become visible only through methodical investigation. One structure stands out as absolutely fundamental. Every moment of consciousness unfolds in time, yet we experience that flow in a peculiar way. Past, present, and future don't simply succeed each other like beads on a string. Something more intricate occurs, something that makes unified experience possible at all. Two moments exist simultaneously. Right now, while you read this present word, the previous word lingers somehow in your awareness, not as a current perception, since that word is past, not as a memory in the usual sense, since you didn't consciously remember it, yet it remains available, still charged with just having been present. This is retention, and without it, consciousness would shatter into disconnected instants. Meanwhile, something else happens. Before you finish this sentence, you're already anticipating its completion, not predicting specific words, but expecting that more will come, that the sentence will resolve, that meaning will emerge. This forward-reaching structure is protension. Together with retention, it creates the living present, the thick now, that contains more than a mathematical instant. Husserl discovered these structures by analyzing the simplest temporal experience, hearing a melody. When you listen to music, you don't hear isolated notes. Each tone flows into the next, creating phrases, harmonies, rhythmic patterns. Yet at any given moment, only one note sounds. How then do you hear the melody as a unified whole rather than disconnected sounds? The answer lies in temporal synthesis. As each new note arrives in original impression, the previous note doesn't vanish completely but gets retained, pushed back into the immediate past while remaining part of your present awareness. Simultaneously, you anticipate the next note based on the pattern emerging. Past, present, and future interpenetrate in every moment of consciousness. This interpenetration isn't optional or psychological, but structurally necessary for experience. Consider what this means. The flow of time isn't something consciousness observes from outside. Consciousness is itself temporal, through and through. Every act of awareness has this triple structure: retention of what just passed, impression of what's now present, protension of what's immediately coming. Remove any, dimension and experience collapses. This analysis influenced generations of philosophers. Heidegger built his entire ontology on temporal structures. Merleau-Ponty used it to understand bodily experience. Derrida found undecidability in the interplay of retention and protension. Yet Husserl himself recognized something troubling. If consciousness constitutes time, what about the temporality of consciousness itself? Does consciousness also flow in time? If so, we need another level to constitute that flow, then another to constitute that one, and so on infinitely. The problem of time consciousness remained unsolved. Nevertheless, this investigation revealed something crucial. Consciousness doesn't encounter a ready-made world of static objects. Rather, it actively constitutes a temporal world through flowing syntheses. Objects appear as enduring identities precisely because consciousness holds together past and future in every present moment. This constitutive activity operates beneath all explicit thinking, making possible the very world we take for granted. Yet that taken-for-granted world, Husserl realized late in his career, deserved phenomenological investigation in its own right. Scientists measure temperature with thermometers. They calculate forces with equations. They observe cells through microscopes. But before any of this, before instruments and mathematics and controlled experiments, the world was already there. Hot and cold were felt. Heavy and light were experienced. Living things moved and grew. This original world, the world as immediately lived before scientific abstraction, Husserl called the Lifeworld. For most of his career, he barely mentioned it. Phenomenology focused on consciousness, intentionality, essences, constitution. The assumption was that by analyzing pure consciousness, we'd understand how any world gets constituted. However, something had been missed. Science doesn't create its object from nothing. Scientists inherit a world already meaningful, already structured by human purposes and practical engagements. They abstract from this lived world to create idealized mathematical models. Nothing's wrong with abstraction itself. Science's power comes from idealization. Physics studies mass points and frictionless planes that don't exist in lived experience. Chemistry analyzes pure substances never found in nature. Biology dissects organisms into systems that living creatures never experience as separate. These abstractions enable prediction and control, yet they also hide something essential. The life world is the forgotten foundation. When physicists measure time with atomic clocks, they forget that time was first experienced in day and night, seasons and aging, before and after. When economists calculate utility, they forget that value was first felt in satisfaction and disappointment, success and failure. Every scientific concept has roots in pre-scientific experience, but science treats its abstractions as if they were primary reality. This creates crisis. Modern sciences became so successful they forgot their own ground. They claim to describe objective reality independent of human experience, yet their entire method depends on human perception, measurement, and interpretation. The mathematization of nature produced tremendous technological achievements, but also disconnected knowledge from life. Scientists study a world no one actually lives in, while the lived world gets dismissed as subjective appearance. Husserl developed the life world concept only in his final years, and it transformed his entire phenomenology. Previously, he'd tried to ground science in pure consciousness. Now he realized science must be grounded in the life world, the concrete, practical, pre-theoretical domain where meaning first emerges. This shift opened phenomenology to culture, history, embodiment, and social life. The life world isn't private experience, but shared reality, the common world we all inhabit before dividing it into subjective and objective. Yet this raises urgent questions. If science is abstract from the life world, have they lost touch with genuine meaning? Can we recover the original sense of experience beneath layers of theoretical construction? Does the crisis of modern knowledge demand returning to lived experience? These questions drove Husserl's final work, where he diagnosed a profound sickness in European intellectual life. Something went terribly wrong. By the 1932, European sciences had achieved unprecedented success. Physics explained the cosmos, chemistry synthesized new materials, biology decoded heredity, medicine extended life, technology transformed daily existence. Yet Husserl saw catastrophe beneath this triumph. The sciences had entered crisis, not despite their success, but because of it. The crisis wasn't empirical. Scientists weren't making false predictions or flawed experiments. The problem cut deeper, touching the very meaning of knowledge itself. Modern science had become so focused on mathematical precision and objective measurement that it lost sight of its own purpose. Why do we pursue knowledge? What makes it valuable? How does scientific truth relate to human life? These questions, once central to inquiry, now seemed irrelevant or unanswerable. The root cause was mathematization. Galileo discovered that nature could be described in the language of mathematics. Quantities replaced qualities. Geometric space replaced lived space. Clock time replaced experienced duration. This move proved extraordinarily fruitful. Mathematical physics could predict planetary motion, calculate trajectories, engineer machines. However, something got sacrificed in the process. The world science describes isn't the world anyone experiences. Nobody lives among mass points and electromagnetic fields. We inhabit a world of colors and sounds, hopes and disappointments, familiar places and meaningful projects. Science treats this lived reality as merely subjective, derivative, less real than mathematical structures. The objective world becomes primary, while the experiencing subject gets dismissed as irrelevant or reduced to neural mechanisms. This inversion creates absurdity. Science claims to describe reality independent of consciousness, yet science itself is a human activity performed by conscious subjects. Every measurement requires perception. Every theory requires understanding. Every experiment requires interpretation. The objective world science investigates is always a world for subjects, accessible only through subjective acts. By forgetting the constituting subject, science cut itself off from its own ground. Furthermore, this forgetting had consequences beyond epistemology. When the life world gets dismissed as subjective illusion, human meaning becomes unintelligible, ethics loses foundation, politics becomes mere power, culture fragments into relativism. The crisis of sciences is ultimately a crisis of European humanity itself, which built its identity on rational knowledge, but no longer understands what knowledge means. Can this crisis be resolved? Husserl believed phenomenology offered the solution. By returning to the life world, by analyzing how scientific abstractions emerge from lived experience, by understanding consciousness as the ground of all objectivity, we could refound sciences on their proper basis. This wasn't rejecting science, but clarifying its true sense. The task required recognizing something philosophy had struggled with for centuries. We never encounter the world alone. A disturbing thought haunts phenomenology. If I can only access my own consciousness, how do I know other minds exist? Everything appears to me within my experience through my intentional acts. Perhaps other people are just complex phenomena in my consciousness, appearances without inner life. Maybe I'm the only genuine subject, and everything else, including other humans, exists only as my intentional objects. This nightmare is called solipsism. The problem isn't merely theoretical. If phenomenology studies consciousness from within, it seems trapped in a single perspective. My consciousness is absolutely given to me. Your consciousness is never directly accessible. I experience your body, your behaviors, your expressions, but never your actual experiencing. How then can phenomenology claim to understand intersubjective reality? Husserl wrestled with this problem throughout his career. Early on, he focused almost exclusively on individual consciousness. However, he gradually recognized that consciousness is never truly solitary. The world I experience isn't private property, but shared reality. When I perceive an object, I experience it as existing for anyone who might observe it. This for anyone structure belongs essentially to perception itself. The solution involves understanding empathy, though not as mere sympathy or emotional resonance. Empathy in phenomenological sense means the unique way we apprehend other consciousnesses. When you see someone wince in pain, you don't infer their suffering through analogical reasoning. You don't conclude they have experiences because their body resembles yours. Rather, you directly grasp their pain in their expression, their suffering in their behavior. This grasping is immediate yet mediated, direct yet recognizing alterity. Empathy has peculiar structure. I never experience your consciousness the way you do. Your pain is given originally to you, derivatively to me. Yet this derivative givenness is itself original, a unique mode of accessing otherness. Through empathy, I constitute other subjects as genuine centers of experience, not as objects in my world, but as subjects for whom the world appears differently. This constitution of others transforms everything. Once other subjects exist, the world becomes intersubjective. The objective world isn't my private construction, but shared reality constituted through overlapping perspectives. What makes something objective is precisely that it appears to multiple subjects from different viewpoints, yet maintains identity across those variations. Scientific objectivity presupposes this intersubjective ground. Moreover, community becomes possible only through mutual recognition. We don't just exist alongside each other, but constitute a shared we with common meanings, traditions, and horizons. Culture, language, history all depend on intersubjectivity. The life world isn't my individual world, but our world, inhabited together, meaningful through collective sense-making. Yet even this insight doesn't reach the ultimate discovery that crowns phenomenology, the correlation that makes everything else intelligible. Return to the beginning. Consciousness is always intentional, always directed toward objects. Objects always appear to consciousness, never exist apart from appearing. These aren't two separate facts, but one fundamental structure. No consciousness without world, no world without consciousness. This is the a priori correlation, and grasping it dissolves centuries of philosophical confusion. Traditional philosophy split reality down the middle. On one side, subjects with their mental states, perceptions, and thoughts. On the other side, objects with their properties, existing independently, causing sensations in minds. Then philosophy asked, how does the subject access the object? How do representations match reality? Can we ever know things as they truly are? These questions generated endless debate because they start from a false premise. The correlation reveals there is no gap to bridge. Consciousness and world aren't separate entities that somehow must connect. They're mutually defining poles of a single structure. You cannot conceive consciousness without objects it intends. You cannot conceive objects without consciousness to which they appear. Neither is primary, neither is derivative. They arise together in correlative dependence. This dissolves the traditional opposition between realism and idealism. Realism claims the world exists independently of consciousness. Idealism claims consciousness constitutes the world. Both positions make the same mistake, treating consciousness and world as separable, then arguing which is primary. Phenomenology reveals they're inseparable from the start. The world is neither purely mind-independent nor purely mind-dependent, but constituted through consciousness while maintaining its own sense of transcendence. Consider what this means. The problem of skepticism evaporates. Skepticism asks whether our experiences correspond to external reality. But there is no external reality apart from what shows itself to possible experience. The problem of solipsism dissolves. Other subjects aren't inferences from behavior, but directly constituted through empathy as essential to intersubjective world. The mind-body problem transforms. Body isn't external object that somehow produces consciousness, but lived body, the way consciousness is incarnate and situated. Phenomenology becomes a third way beyond old dichotomies. Not subjectivism, because objects have their own sense and lawfulness. Not objectivism, because that sense emerges only through constituting consciousness. The a priori correlation shows that subject and object, consciousness and world are co-original and interdependent. This insight influenced every major philosophical movement of the 20th century. Existentialism took up embodied consciousness and human freedom. Hermeneutics explored how meaning gets interpreted within historical horizons. Post-structuralism questioned stable identities and discovered infinite play of differences. Continental philosophy as a whole descends from phenomenological beginnings, even when departing from or criticizing them. Meanwhile, cognitive science increasingly recognizes that mind and world aren't separate but coupled through active engagement. Husserl never completed his project. Thousands of manuscript pages remain studying specific constitutive problems, yet his fundamental vision endures. Philosophy must return to the phenomena themselves, to experience as actually lived, to the structures that make appearing possible. By doing so, We discover not subjective fantasy, but the universal conditions of any world whatsoever. Consciousness and world correlate necessarily. Understanding that correlation is the task phenomenology sets for thought, a task that continues unfolding wherever people ask how anything at all can show itself as what it is.